What a shame. It would have been nice to observe for a little longer. You received the gift of abundance.
Surely you can withstand the blessing of destruction.
Okay, so I'm no expert, but, that looks pretty fatal. So, that now brings up the question. Who the hell are you? Death is something curious in Star Rail. There are the certain deaths, like Cocolia and Mikhail. Then, there's the deaths that were undone, or were mainly used as plot devices. These would include Robin and Firefly in the Pentaconn story. So then, where does Tingyun fall in that camp? In my opinion, Tingyun was always a certain death. Her body disappearing after Phantalia was released definitely seemed off to me, but there was a whole cutscene for her funeral. The game even has you do a quest to wrap up Tingyun's story by giving presents to dear friends of hers. Logically, that should be the end of her story, correct? Gallagher and Misha are both gone now, but we can still play as them, and Tingyun was the initial holder of the dead playable character title. Realistically, that should mean she is long gone, and that's the end of it. Right? That's not really the case, however. Many people have speculated if Tingyun's fate was really set in stone due to the weird nature of her story, and how mysterious the Luofu is as well. I mean, for God's sake, there was a whole continuance dedicated to ghosts who could morph into the shape of others or control them. That place is not normal. Getting back to the matter at hand. Tingyun's fate for many has actually been more ambiguous. Whether it's out of disbelief that the cute fox girl is really dead, or proper thought processes, many felt unsure. Today, I want to talk about Tingyun's death, how different other deaths in Star Rail are comparatively, and why it ultimately would have made sense to keep her dead, even if this new leak really is a new Tingyun. Let's begin. Also, if you enjoy this content, please be sure to like and subscribe. It helps the channel out a lot. I never do this, and I feel like I really need to try doing it a bit more often. Also, please be nice. This is my first attempt at something like this. I'm doing my best out here, man. Okay, back to the video. To fully understand why this doubt exists, I want to pivot briefly to Hoyoverse as a whole, and its reputation with death in some of their games. Let's look around. Zenless Zone Zero just came out in the last few months, so it can only make so much headway in this short amount of time. Death is far from common in Genshin Impact, and if people do die, it's usually not story or playable characters. Then, we get to Honkai Impact 3rd. Listen closely when I say this. That is not the case for Honkai Impact 3rd. As early as Chapter 4 of the story, a character you had just met recently dies. You see the lead up and eventual death of Kiana's mom in the game. And of course, there's the two big ones. The death of Alicia and the death of Himiko. Play the clip.
Never let you go is why I did them all for a chance at least to live in your way. Love of you is my most cherished thing, so stay alive bravely.
These deaths were not erased. They didn't go back on these choices. These characters served their purpose and passed away having their roles in the story completed. Honkai Impact is not afraid of getting rid of characters in any way, shape, or form, and it is still the game willing to go the furthest in that aspect. Genshin is pretty clearly at the bottom of the list, and that's perfectly fine, it's just different approaches to storytelling philosophy. Star Rail now lands in this odd middle spot. Sharing the Honkai title, many similar characters, and more importantly, writers, gives the impression many story directions and ideals might be a bit similar. That's why many, when they see the Honkai name and see a character dead, assume that they're gonna stay dead. There's one key difference between Star Rail and Honkai Impact 3rd deaths so far: build-up and impact. Let's go back to Himiko in HI3, a character who supports you throughout the game constantly. She rescues both Kiana and Mei at different points, and allows the player at least a small bit of time to really see and build a relationship with her. She is the girl's mentor, and while a bit of an alcoholic nowadays, she still has everyone's respect. This is conveyed a lot in the story, and her constant involvement being the eye in the sky for the Valkyrie team that Kiana is assigned to really brings players to like her as well. Her death wasn't expected, I would say, unless you're a longtime Honkai fan, but it was done very well. Himiko receives multiple solo chapters leading up to that fateful Chapter 9, where you spend time getting to hear exactly how she feels and experience her willingness and drive to protect those that she cares about so much. This death had a big impact on players, even if they do tend to meme it a bit nowadays, but when looking at YouTube, this cutscene is still one of these most watched from the entire game. No death in Star Rail has had this same effect. It's not even close either. Tingyun was a valued member and friend for the brief time on the Luofu, but her death served far more as a shock factor moment rather than there being an emphasis on her death. This was later rectified with her funeral and the ending cutscene, but still. The initial moment was far from the best, and it was hard to truly establish a strong bond to the character in that short amount of time. Notice this wasn't an isolated moment either, doing these types of deaths. I really hate to do it, but yeah, play the Firefly and Robin cutscenes.
Look, friend. The game has already begun. Allow me to make you an offer. One you can't refuse. No reason to choose otherwise. And no other choices.
Ah, yikes. It's interesting looking at these moments as a whole, because you find things you may not have thought about otherwise. Firefly's story somewhat matches the general pacing of Tingyun's departure, although Firefly definitely had a bit more emotional impact for players because of the more intimate moments you got to share with her. This doesn't change the fact, though, the pattern is honestly kinda similar. New character is introduced early on, have them be a companion so you have to spend time with them, and then they die in an unexpected way in accordance with the plot. For Tingyun, it was to reveal Phantalia. For Firefly, it was to show off that people truly were being attacked in the dreamscape somehow, and to have that shock set in that something more was wrong with Pentaconn. We then arrive at Robin, who was probably the most shock factor thing I've ever seen. I'm going to be honest, I don't really like how this moment was done, as I was still more in shock over Firefly, and you don't really have any time with Robin beforehand. I personally saw this cutscene and just went, oh, well that sucks. Regardless, these other two shock deaths were ultimately reversed in the sense that they never truly died. Gallagher simply felt like being a bit of a jokester. Yes, I know the actual reasons, but we aren't here for Pentacon's story review. That's a whole other demon that I am not handling. So if Tingyun seems like she matches the general description of these fake outs, why do I still believe she's gone? It's hard to explain, but putting it as simply as I can, her existence never had a huge purpose. I know that sounds crazy, but bear with me here. With what we know currently about her in the story, it doesn't matter as much if she's alive or not. Her small role in the story was accomplished as Phantalia's puppet. If the writers bring her back, then they can obviously change that, but again, I'm going off of what we know right now, and this is what we know. To help further explain this, let's now look at the characters in Star Rail who are truly gone. Cocolia, Misha, Gallagher. What is the one similarity you see with all of these characters? They had a purpose until the end, or at least near the end, of their respective stories. Cocolia is the reason the entire Belobog story occurs, and she is the final boss that you confront. Misha? He's the entire reason the Trailblazer acquired the Path of Harmony and was able to break free from the Order. And Gallagher? Gallagher was the watchful eye, helping the Trailblazer along the path and progressing the story so that the Order could ultimately be combated. Their stories ended when they had accomplished the goals set for them. Gallagher was never meant to dethrone the Order and save Pentaconn by himself. Misha was already long gone and took on that form so he could find a way to help Pentaconn even after he had passed as Mikhail. And again, Cocolia literally tries to kill you the entire story. These characters had a clear path in front of them and a mission to accomplish, whether it be for the story or actually in the story. Their passing means something to the player after getting to see their passion, their determination, or their devastating lore play out in front of you. Or for Cocolia, getting to your wildfire, then pummeling her. I promise I'll stop the Cocolia hate now. I'm sorry. So tell me, does Tingyun really have any of that? The answer in my mind is a pretty solid no. Tingyun throughout the story never expresses many deep desires or a true direction. She wants to live comfortably and enjoy her life for the next 100+ years that she has. She enjoys her job, has friends, and lives in relative peace. Very different from the other characters mentioned above, right? Well, funny enough, this happened in Honkai Impact as well. The character who died in Chapter 4 was a girl named Wendy, who had Hersher powers. Basically, she had demigod powers. Let's go with that, it's gonna take too long to explain. This was the sole reason Wendy was important to the story. She had very little lore explained until the very last minute, and then disappeared without a trace. You actually don't even see her die on screen. She never came back in the story, and while you can argue and say her goal the writers set was complete, I would disagree in a sense. Wendy didn't have a big purpose and was simply just there to advance the plot. It's an easy appeal to emotion to have a nice character you met perish, and that's exactly what they did. She never got to explore personal goals or expand on her story in a meaningful way beyond some last-minute dialogue and some story interactions in the very short 2 chapters you get to know her for. On paper, sounds pretty similar to our foxy friend, honestly. This is just another confirmation of what makes Tingyun's death feel so normal in the grand scheme of things. It was simply easy to do and made for a good story moment to generate a lot of buzz. Tingyun was a welcome addition to the Luofu story for sure, but she really doesn't have the story or purpose as every other character talked about. Her death was an excellent surprise to the players, and has generated talk about her to this day for very good reason. This doesn't change the fact that Star Rail knew what they were doing in that writer's room. She wasn't truly fleshed out or given many of the same things other characters who died were. She didn't return either, since she simply wasn't important enough to the Xianzhou story, or the story at large. Tingyun really did seem to be one of the shock deaths that was meant to stick. It seems more and more likely that her story will continue in the future, but if this is where it really ended, I think there's nothing to complain about. As someone who likes the character, it was an insane moment to experience, and it really was a good way to get me more invested. For people who don't like the character, she wasn't that important. You don't have to see her again unless you use her in team comps. Seems like a win-win to me. To start wrapping things up, even with the new Foxian unit appearing in the leaks seeming to be a new Tingyun, I want to still say this was such a unique choice, and it did a wonderful job of exciting players and generating discussion. Leaving the death technically ambiguous while still providing a heart-wrenching and emotional farewell, is extremely tricky of the creators, and I will always respect giving people a runaround if it is funny. And this was funny. With Tingyun being my favorite character, and this topic always being such an interesting one to me, it was a lot of fun to get to make this video finally. It wasn't nearly as detailed as I wanted, but for a first try at something like this, I'm fairly content with it. Alright, well, welcome to the end of the video. I didn't really script this, but yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this. This was definitely different from what I usually do, but it was something that I had in the backlog for a very long time that I really wanted to work on, so finally got around to it, and I feel okay about how it came out. If you guys have any more suggestions for character-related things in the future, please leave a comment. I would love to hear about it. There are so many unique and interesting stories and characters in this game, and there are especially very interesting ones like Acheron and Welt, whose lore actually leads to the other Honkai games. It's a lot, and it can be very fun to kind of dive into, so I'm all ears for any suggestions, but once again, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one. See ya!